knows? I mean, I don't know what he's going to do. Dana, I think, was quoted as saying he wants him to stay at 185. Who knows? He looked great, though. I'll give him that. He looked fantastic.
I mean, I guess there are certain examples of guys. It's rare. I guess it's more rare, or it happens less often, where you see guys that they have more success at a higher weight class than a lower weight class. Certain guys bounce around, like obviously Donald Cerrone or Nate Diaz. They've had kind of varying success at higher and lower weight classes. But then you think of somebody like Anthony Rumble Johnson, who he was crushing dudes at 170, but I think the weight cut took more out of him than it was doing for him, because he lost some matchups that you probably would have assumed that he would have won.
Exactly.
And then he fights at 205 and he's just crushing dudes, and you're like, how is it even possible that he could make 170 pounds?
Yeah, when you talk about guys that bounce around weight classes, that's typically guys that maybe, I want to choose my words carefully, but, they've been around a long time. What's the word? Not journeymen. They're not journeymen, because Donald Cerrone and Nate Diaz aren't journeymen, but, they've been around. They stuck to one weight class initially. They didn't win the belt there, so then they went up, but then they'll come back down. They'll entertain fights at multiple classes. Are they truly seeking the belt? Because if you're trying to make a run at it and you're trying to be the champion, then you stick to one weight class. You have to stick to one weight class. And going to what you said about Rumble, I mean, that's the perfect example of what I was talking about with Kelvin Gastelum at 170. Rumble fought at 170 for such a long time. I mean, it's still crazy to even believe that. And then he fought Vitor at 185, didn't make weight, got tapped out against Vitor. And now you look at him, he's an absolute monster at 205, absolute monster. Other than Daniel Cormier, just destroyed everybody. So that's the perfect example. Sometimes if you can make the weight, doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
That's the dude. I mean, I don't know, but if there was one person in the world that I wouldn't want to fight, that's him. Anthony Johnson is the one dude that it's like fuck it. Like, why? Why would I ever?
He's a scary individual for sure, and Daniel Cormier going into this fight. I mean, even though he won the first fight, and I think it was a rear naked choke in the third round, there's still got to be a little bit of doubt in your mind, because that first punch that DC ate sent him flying across the octagon. So, both of these guys obviously can take a lot of positives away from that fight. DC obviously won the fight, won by submission. And Rumble knows he can hurt him. So if I was Rumble, all I'm going to work on for that fight is getting back to my feet, conditioning first and foremost, because I think he did gas a little in that. And just, if I get taken down, getting back to my feet, take down defense, of course, work on those things. And I could see him winning that fight. But of course, DC, he has the perfect opposite game plan: close the distance, get his hands on you, and take you down. So I'm looking forward to that fight. That's actually one of the better title fights they're all good title fights coming up, but that's the one that I'm really looking forward to, with a good backstory. And as you say, Rumble just brings that excitement, because one punch can end it all. He's like Mike Tyson back in the day.
Yeah. It's like in any given second of any given fight, it could be all over. Let me ask you, this is just almost like a fanboy question. What type of style would you rather fight, right? Anthony Rumble Johnson, who, let's just assuming the worst case scenario, right? Which is,
I hate fighting wrestlers.
Yeah, or being grinded out by DC.
Hate fighting wrestlers. Pisses me off. Because it's not just that. It's not just the fight. It's the training for fighting wrestlers. It's completely different, because, of course, you got to focus on your offense. You got to focus on your striking, because everybody knows the way I fight. I go forward, I throw punches and kicks. That's what I like to do. Which, I've got a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I can beat black belts. And I never use my submissions. And my jiu-jitsu coach gets very annoyed. He's like, Mike, Jesus Christ, when are you going to use some jiu-jitsu sometime? And I do need to think about that. But anyway, my point is, you have to work on your offense. But if you're fighting a wrestler, then you got to work on your takedown defense. You got to work on your getting back to your feet. You got to work on your jiu-jitsu, So it just makes the camp much more strenuous. And it can be difficult, getting hold of good, solid wrestlers that want to come in and spar 2-3 times a week. So there's a whole, there's an issue with that. You got to get on your phone. You're asking your manager. You're asking your coach. You're asking other fighters. Hey, any good wrestlers at 185 that you got decent jiu-jitsu or a southpaw? It becomes very specific. That's a pain in the ass. Whereas a kickboxer is a little bit easier to find. I remember when I was fighting Anderson, and then I fought Rockhold, and then Dan Henderson. I thought, oh, this is great. I don't need to do any wrestling, because neither of these guys are going to try and take me down. So I just focused on my boxing and my kickboxing. So to answer your question, yeah, 100%. I'd always rather fight a striker. 100%.
That's crazy because just looking at Rumble Johnson and DC, I would pick DC 10 out of 10 times. But then he would just take my head and shove it into the ground.
Yeah, DC might smother you, but you might lose your head or a jaw against Rumble, that's for sure.
I'm looking at your record right now. You have 4 submissions, but then I'm looking at when they were. They were in England super early in your career.
No. But it has on my record that my first ever win, sorry, someone called me then, was a submission. It's Steve Matthews, Pain and Glory, 2004.
Yeah.
But that's incorrect. There was actually a 37-second knockout. I don't know why that's on there.
Ooh.
Yes, I've got, and then one against a guy called Alex Cook, and then one against Ross Poynton. I think they're the only submissions I ever had.
This guy, your first fight ever, Steve Matthews, he is not doing too good.
It's my first ever fight. What do you want? One of the best in the world?
You guys went in opposite directions. Holy shit, did you guys go in opposite directions? You're currently the UFC champion. He retired with an 0-5 record in April 30th, 2005 after getting submitted by Jimmy Gaines in 1 minute and 7 seconds. He never lasted more than 1 minute and 7 seconds in any given fight.
Hey, that sounds like the perfect first ever pro fight. My manager back in the day did a solid job. Paul
really
Davis.
He got you a fucking bum.
No. Hold on. At what point of his career did I fight him? How many fights had he had?
No, I believe you were his 3rd fight, so he was more experienced than you.
Yeah, he'd had 2 fights. He'd lost them, but who knows? Maybe the guy was going to turn it around. And that, incidentally, that fight was at heavyweight.
Okay.
And I remember my manager back in the day, as I say, shout out to Paul Davis. He put this vision in my head. That's kind of why I'm here. Unfortunately, we went separate ways. He ended up suing me. That's a story for another podcast. But what was I saying? Oh, yeah, no. So when he first came to me about fighting in mixed martial arts, I knew nothing about it. I'd done martial arts since I was 8 years old, but I didn't know anything about UFC or Pride. But he just told me there was money to be made. And, I was working every shitty dead-end job under the sun. So, I was interested in making some money, of course. And I said, is that not dangerous? He said, Michael, I will never put you in a life-changing fight unless there's a life-changing check. I always remember that was a line he said. On my first ever professional fight, I got paid £0. But, of course, I'm like, okay, well, you just get the ball rolling. So it's okay, fair play. I said, but one condition. My girlfriend doesn't pay to get in. I'm not putting on a show and fighting here, and my girlfriend has to pay to get in. But she still had to buy a ticket, 25 quid. So I was fuming about that. Huh. I was very pissed off.
That's funny.
Oh,
That's funny.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's so funny. We talked about this before, just kind of like the parallels between fighters and comedians, and like, why would you even fucking do it? Like in the beginning, you're like, I'm gonna go get into a cage, I'm gonna fist fight another dude to entertain a crowd for no money, just for the kind of the thrill and the experience of doing it. And I think when I tell people about doing stand-up comedy, a lot of people have the same reaction. They go like, dude, getting on stage in front of a bunch of strangers and trying to make them laugh sounds extraordinarily terrifying. But there's something in you that kind of makes you do it in the beginning, you know?
Well, of course. I mean, that does sound terrifying to me. You know, it really would, walking into a room and going on stage and attempting to be funny. I'll sit with you and have a beer or a glass of wine and no doubt I'll make you laugh. But walking on there where you're expected to be funny, yeah, that does sound terrifying. But as you say, well, you've got to start somewhere, you know, and you can't expect people to pay you. So you've got to start, you've got to make a name and get out there. And so obviously when I took that first fight for nothing, that's what that was. That was a journey, you know, that was the beginning of the journey. And yourself and all comedians or all fighters, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. It's like most things in life, you know, and you got to have that vision and that foresight that you got to start here. You got to get your experience, and with hard work, determination, and a bit of luck, you might get somewhere. But I remember that first fight, even though I was getting paid nothing, I was so nervous, like you probably were your first ever gig, because I'm thinking, so I'm here, and as you kindly pointed out, he's a bum. He's not a bum. You know, you got to respect all fighters.
He's a warrior.
He's a warrior. There you go. Thank you very much. Shout out Steve Matthews. No, but I'm thinking, I'm here. I'm fighting in a little sports hall in the north of England, and I've given up work. I've got 2 kids, and I'm thinking, if I can't beat this guy in this sports hall in the northeast of England, that, it's just a little show with like 300 people there. If I can't win this fight, then I've made a big mistake in my life here, by giving up work and this and that, So that's where the pressure came from. But of course, I beat him. I won that fight. And then the second time, you have the same emotions. And the goalposts move every time. And then I was on The Ultimate Fighter, and I'm thinking, well, if I don't win this fight on The Ultimate Fighter, I'm not going to get to the final. And then it's the final of The Ultimate Fighter. Then it's your main event. Then it's a title fight for the UFC. You know what I'm saying? So the goalposts always move. So, but